So, hi everyone, it's Radhika here again, and I'm going to continue talking about the MCAT today, and more specifically, scoring. Now, if you haven't seen any of the videos that have been created by us thus far, I'll give you a brief overview of the objective and some introduction about myself. So, like I mentioned already, my name is Radhika. I am an MCAT prep instructor with Prep 101. And I've been working in the MCAT industry for the last 5 years. I've been teaching this exam for the last 5 years. And the reason that we've created this series of videos is because as a test prep company, we get made aware of lots of the information that's out there. And this is really, really important information if you're a pre-med student who has the intentions of pursuing medical school, or if you're even a non-pre-med student and you know you want to get into medical school. And there are certain pieces of information that are very key to your journey to medical school, the title of this project. However, we find that some of this information is very obscure and it's very hard to obtain. So the purpose of this video project was basically for us to take all of that information that we were able to collect as a result of being in the industry for all these years and to disseminate that in a useful manner. We do strongly feel that some of the content that's presented in this video is really important in order for you to start tailoring and gearing your journey to getting into the medical schools of your interest. Okay, so today specifically, we're going to talk about scoring on this exam. And I want to talk about 4 things over the course of this video. First, I'm going to give you a basic overview about some of the scoring. I'm going to give you then the types of scores that you'll be able to see or that you'll have access to. Third, I'll talk about how the scaled scoring system of this exam works. And lastly, fourth, I'll show you an example of a sample score report. So if this is an exam that you're planning on writing and you want to know more about the scoring, let's continue. All right, so here's the first thing. These are some of the basics that you should know about the score of the MCAT exam. First and foremost, this is so crucial, all questions are weighted equally. That means no matter the difficulty level of a question, whether it's something you could do with your eyes closed in your sleep without even thinking, or whether it's something that you'd need like 7 sheets of paper and a pen with unlimited ink to be able to answer, doesn't matter how long or short, and irregardless of the difficulty of each question, all questions are weighted the exact same. That's 1 mark, okay? Second, there is no penalty, there's no deduction for getting answers wrong. So one of the things I tell my students all the time is, should you ever be leaving a question blank? No. Essentially, a wrong answer that you've selected is going to be calculated or used in the same manner as an unanswered question. However, there are 4 answer options for each question on the MCAT, A, B, C, and D, that follows every single multiple choice question. Even though you may not know the answer to the question, by selecting one of those answer options, you've given yourself a chance to be able to get that question correct. So you should never be leaving a question blank, considering that there's no penalty for incorrect answers. You should always take a guess. Okay, third, the MCAT is unlike other standardized exams, such as the GMAT, okay? The GMAT is one of those exams which selects the next question that you're going to get based on the difficulty level of the previously answered questions. So it's one that will give you more difficult or more easy questions based on how you performed on a current question. The MCAT isn't like that. That means that the questions are in a random order of difficulty. There is no order whatsoever. The first question that you may see on this exam may be extremely difficult, or the last question that you see on this exam may be extremely difficult. There is no correlation, no pattern whatsoever with the difficulty level on this exam and the order in which the questions are presented to you. That's why timing techniques are crucial for your successful performance on this exam. Because each question is weighted the same, because you know that there's no order of difficulty, that it is completely random, you should be setting an allotted amount of time for doing each question. And once that time passes, you should know very strictly to move on to the next question. Just because there might be something very easy on later in the exam that you may miss because you spent too much time doing this question that was super hard, okay? Now, the other thing, and this is where this exam is quite different, is that there may and probably will be experimental questions. Experimental questions are different from scored questions. These are questions that will not count towards your total score, okay? The reason they're being given to you is because the AAMC wants to offer them as scored questions to students who will write later. Now, they don't know how students will perform, and therefore you are, so to speak, the guinea pig. They want to know which ones are good questions to offer in a later exam, and therefore they're going to test the question on you. You'll never know what these questions are, but the takeaway from that is not every question will count towards your final score. So if you get a question that's really difficult, that's taking up too much time or too much effort, and you just don't seem to understand it, there is some comfort in knowing that perhaps it may be an experimental question. However, this doesn't mean that you don't have to do all of the questions. You should still be doing all of the questions. And again, this goes back to the fact that you don't know which ones the experimental ones are. It doesn't make sense to take a guess and say, this is probably experimental. I'll be fine if I don't do it. Okay, so let's move onwards. Now that you know a little bit about the basics of the scoring, let's talk about the types of scores that the AAMC actually calculates. Okay, so essentially, there are 5 types of scores. The first is the raw score. Your raw score, simply put, is the number of questions in that section that you got correct, or the number of questions in the entire exam that you got correct. The science sections have 53 questions, and the cars section has, the science sections have 59 questions each, and the cars section has 53 questions. They will calculate a raw score based on the sheer number of questions that you got correct. Okay, now the raw score is something that you'll never see, and it's not on your score report. The only purpose is for the AAMC and no one else, not you, not the medical schools that you apply to, or the application service through which you apply, will ever be able to see your raw score. It's not made available to test takers. Okay, now there are 2 types of scaled scores. One is a scaled section score, and the other one is your total scaled score. What the AAMC does is it takes your raw score, that's the number of questions you got correctly one more time, and it turns it into a scaled score through a statistical process called equating. Now, the whole purpose of a scaled score is to adjust for difficulty levels in different versions of the exam. Okay, so there are 4 sections. We've talked about these previously. The physical sciences, followed by cars, followed by the biological sciences, and lastly, the behavioral sciences. Each of these 4 sections will be scored on a scale from 118 ranging to 132. Now, when these individual sectional scaled scores are summed, you get a total scaled score. So 118 times 4 gives you 472. 132 times 4 gives you 528. So that's how the total score is calculated. Basically, the summation of each of the individual 4 sectional scores. Okay, now, what you have to also know here is that there are many different versions of the MCAT. So just because you write on July 15th and I write on July 15th doesn't mean that we've necessarily written the same version of the exam. There are multiple versions of the exam. So the reason the scaling system has kind of been developed and the reason it exists is to take the number of raw scored or raw correct questions and to kind of put us onto the same scale. Because if we both write different versions of the exam, test takers and medical schools need to be able to see how well my abilities compare to other applicants who have also applied. Therefore, because there are different versions of the exam, there is no magic number of correct answers that you need to get your targeted scaled score. So for example, if I want to aim to get a 500 and let's say 22 as my total scaled score, that's not the equivalent of saying I can only get 2 questions wrong in each section of this exam in order to hit that target. The reason being is because if I have a very, very easy version of the exam, that scale, that equating process is not going to be very forgiving, such that maybe the moment I get 1 question wrong, instead of getting the moment I get 1 question wrong, if the exam was so easy, perhaps I've dropped down to a 125 already. Whereas if you wrote it and you had a different version of the exam and you got only 1 question wrong in a section, perhaps that is having the equivalent of a 132. At the end of the day, our abilities are matched by having a scaled score. Okay, so 472 is the lowest you can get. 528 is the highest that you can get. Now, the other type of score that's important to you is a percentile rank. A percentile rank is a very statistical term. And what it means is it tends to describe the percentage of candidates who scored equal or below your score in that section or the exam overall. For example, we call the median the 50th percentile. The median is the average number or the middle number in a data set, and it also describes what 50% of the population scored up until. Okay, the last type of score that you get is a confidence band, and we'll talk about that a little more when I show you an example of a score report. So again, these are the 5 different types of scores. You will not be able to see the raw scores, and the confidence bands are something that will appear on your score report kind of as a range. The other 3 are what you should kind of gear your studying towards. So let's talk about those in a little more detail. First of all, because each of the individual scales, as shown on this diagram that has been obtained from the AMC website, each section ranges from 118 to 132. The median, or the top of a normal distribution curve, or the 50th percentile of each of these 4 sections happens to be 125. So there it is for chemical and physical foundations. There it is for cars. There is a 125 for the biological and biochemical foundations. And there's a 125 for the psychological, social, and biological foundations of behavior section. Now, since this is the median or the top of the curve section score for each of those sections, what I can do is sum them to get the median or the 50th percentile overall for the exam. And that's what this curve down here is representing. So this 500 is the summation of each of those 125 median scores from the individual 4 sections, okay? So the top of the curve, if this is a normal distribution, which it looks like it is where the highest frequency of scorers are actually scoring. Okay, so a few changes then from the last exam is because this total score now ranges from 528 being the highest to 472 the lowest, that means there are 57 possible total scores you can get. How did I get that 57? By simply subtracting 472 from 528. This is an advantage to you if you're going to be writing this exam. The reason being is because the old exam ranged from 3 to 45, where 45 was the maximum score you could get, and 3 was the lowest score you could get. Now that gives a possibility of 43 different total scores that you could have gotten. You can now get 57 different scores. So you can see that the MCAT has become a lot more granular, and it's increased its statistical power in that sense. The other thing that the AMC has also kind of worked to change and implement is making use of the more higher range or the perfect scaled score. So on the old version of the exam, which was scored from 3 to 45, there were very many years in which no one got a 45. Okay, that means no one technically got a perfect on this exam. However, in recent years, or the last 2 years, people have been known to get a 528. And the reason this is possible is because you have to remember getting a 528 doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting perfect on this exam. What it means is that you're achieving the 100th percentile. So to speak, you're essentially getting perfect because you got the number of questions that the AAMC had designated in order to be in the 100th percentile. Okay, so this is a little bit of an introduction on your scaled score. Now, what I really want to talk to you about is your score report. Okay, so this is a sample AAMC score report. This is what you get when your score is released on their website, and this is what you forward to the medical schools that you apply to. So for example, if you're a student in Ontario and you're applying through MCAT, this is where you give them your AAMC ID. And the AAMC ID is something that OMSAS has the ability to log into and see your final score for. Okay, so what you'll see are a few column headers. The first one being the section of the MCAT that the score is referring to, the actual score that you got, the confidence band range, the percentile rank, and the score profile. Okay, now let's talk about some of these things. Obviously, the section part refers to which of the 4 sections that you achieved that score. The first section that you wrote was the chemical and physical foundations of biological systems. And on this sample report, this student scored a 125. And so be it for the others. Now, what happens is when you sum all 4 of the sectional scores together, at the bottom, it gives you your total score. So out of the 472 to the 528, this student scored a overall 506. Now that 506 refers to the 76th percentile. That means 76% of the test takers who took this exam in the year 2015 scored equal or below this student. That means a 24% of the total takers scored above this student. Okay, so it's a pretty self-explanatory report. What you can see is that the student did very, very well on the biological and biochemical foundations. They got a 97th percentile, which was referring to a total score of 132. And you can see their score profile from the lowest to the highest and where this band really lies, this diamond. And it's very close to almost having reached the maximal score on that section. Okay, now one thing I haven't talked to you about that I decided to explain later are the confidence bands. So here are the confidence bands for this student on each of those 4 exams. What the confidence bands indicate is it's more for the medical school use, and it's to kind of tell them to not overemphasize small differences in scoring between similar applicants. So if I achieved a 125 in the chemical and physical foundations like this student had, and you perhaps achieved a 126, the confidence band kind of serves to elucidate, given certain testing conditions, what I could have scored, what you could have scored. Because there are things that affect your ability, your test-taking ability. Perhaps the room temperature wasn't ideal. Perhaps the screen wasn't ideal. Perhaps you were very tired when you took the test. What the confidence band serves to do is use an algorithm to show and indicate what scores you could have achieved in various situations. So it's more able to reflect your true test-taking ability or your true scores. Not in just this one instance by giving you this number, but by giving you a range of where your true score is most likely to lie. okay? And it really allows medical schools to differentiate between two students or two applicants who had perhaps a very, very similar score, knowing that they both had the potential to score within a certain range. Okay, so I've talked about the 4 things I wanted to. Basically, to reiterate some of the points that I think are super important, you cannot skip any questions on this exam by leaving them blank. You may not know questions, and that's fine, but since you are not penalized for wrong answer choices, you shouldn't be leaving any single question blank. You should be making a guess. Secondly, raw scores will never be available to you. Okay, the scores that are most important are what kind of scale score you want based on the percentile rank that it corresponds to. The third thing is the AMC has introduced this idea of confidence bands, which are a reflection of where your score may lie and more predictive of your true test taking abilities and therefore your true scores range. Okay, well, that concludes my little discussion for today. I hope you were able to find this talk very useful. We'll continue next time with more of a discussion on these scores. Take care. See you then. Bye for now.